81 days left on the clock, 81 more days for trial preparation, even after the case is returned to her. Now, that would provide her with time to make decisions, say, about the distinction between what acts were official and can't be used and what acts were private and can be used. But beyond that, even if the decision is made, and I think Neil's assessment is a very good one. Obviously, you count votes better than anybody else. If this case goes to trial on a theory that says that only private conduct can be the basis for a prosecution, there are difficult evidentiary issues that the justices hinted at in the argument today. Michael Dreeben, arguing for the special counsel, wants to be able to use evidence of official acts like decisions about who can be the attorney general or the pressure campaign against Mike Pence as evidence of Donald Trump's knowledge and intent.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about the Supreme Court hearing Trump's immunity claims that he is using to protect himself from prosecution by the deranged Jack Smith, okay, who is coming after Trump for the January 6th stuff and the classified documents, okay? Trump is essentially arguing that, hey, I was acting in my official capacity as president, therefore I am immune to civil lawsuits and criminal prosecution, right? That is the argument because court precedent has established that to be the case, okay? That while in office, the president is immune from this stuff. But the questions about whether or not the former president of the United States is immune from this type of prosecution, and that is what they had to hash out today. And unsurprisingly, this has brought up some interesting scenarios about when/if a former president can face prosecution for alleged crimes while in office. Like, for example, when Barack Obama drone strike an American citizen in the Middle East, could he, for example, face prosecution for killing somebody, right, committing that crime? And the lawyers for Jack Smith argued that, yeah, Obama's allowed to get away with murder, but we should be allowed to go after Trump.
The implications of the court's decision here extend far beyond the facts of this case. Could President George W. Bush have been sent to prison for obstructing an official proceeding or allegedly lying to Congress to induce war in Iraq? Could President Obama be charged with murder for killing U.S. citizens abroad by drone strike? Could President Biden someday be charged with unlawfully inducing immigrants to enter the country illegally for his border policies? The answer to all these questions is no. Prosecuting the president for his official acts is an innovation with no foothold in history or tradition and incompatible with our constitutional structure.
How about President Obama's drone strikes?
So the Office of Legal Counsel looked at this very carefully and determined that, number one, the federal murder statute does apply to the executive branch. The president wasn't personally carrying out the strike, but the aiding and abetting laws are broad. And it determined that a public authority exception that's built into statutes and that applied particularly to the murder statute because it talks about unlawful killing did not apply to the drone strike. So this is actually the way that the system should function. The Department of Justice takes criminal law very seriously. It runs it through the analysis very carefully with established principles. It documents them, it explains them, and then the president can go forward in accordance with it. And there is no risk of prosecution for that course of activity.
Thank you for your...
Yeah, so I want you guys to understand how this works. According to the lawyer of Jack Smith, Obama can murder American citizens abroad without due process and get away with it because he was acting as president, all right? That was an official act as president of the United States, okay? But Trump, on the other hand, he can't challenge the outcome of the election and be immune from prosecution, okay? That's essentially the argument from Jack Smith's lawyers, okay? And although the court overall expressed skepticism about Trump's broad claims of immunity, you did have some interesting moments where conservative justices like Samuel Alito brought up this idea that, hey, you know, just having the president of the United States be prosecuted by his political opponents after losing an election, that sets a bad precedent in the future that could destabilize this country, which is exactly what's happening now because it will never stop.
If an incumbent who loses a very close, hotly contested election knows that a real possibility after leaving office is not that the president is going to be able to go off into a peaceful retirement, but that the president may be criminally prosecuted by a bitter political opponent. Will that not lead us into a cycle that destabilizes the functioning of our country as a democracy? And we can look around the world and find countries where we have seen this process, where the loser gets thrown in jail.
So I think it's exactly the opposite, Justice Alito. There are lawful mechanisms to contest the results in an election. And outside the record, but I think of public knowledge, petitioner and his allies filed dozens of electoral challenges, and my understanding is lost all but one that was not outcome determinative in any respect. There were judges that said in order to sustain substantial claims of fraud that would overturn an election result that's certified by a state, you need evidence, you need proof. And none of those things were manifested. So
yeah, so you see that, you heard that, okay? Some interesting thought experiments going on here in the Supreme Court arguments. And I want to talk about what is the likely outcome. Because again, like I told you guys, the lawyers for Trump are basically arguing that, hey, anything the president does while in office can be considered an official act, which would be covered by immunity, okay? Now, again, I don't think that the conservative court is going to accept that argument, but that's not really the goal here, okay? The goal is to actually get the Jack Smith trials delayed until after the election, because you have people like Liz Cheney that are begging the Supreme Court to rule swiftly on Trump's immunity claims.
There's important testimony that the grand jury has heard, according to press reports, that that the public hasn't. And the idea that the January 6th trial would be delayed until after the election, you know, in my view, it just can't be the case that a president can attempt to steal an election, to seize power, and we can't hold him to account until after the next election. I think that the Supreme Court may well, have wanted to be clear that there are certain areas where a president might enjoy immunity. For example, a commander-in-chief acting during a time of war. And that may be why they took the case. But I think it's crucially important that they rule quickly and decisively that no circumstance under which a president's actions would be protected by immunity exists here. No president can attempt to do what Donald Trump did and enjoy immunity for that.
Yeah, so you seen that, you heard that. Now, here's the problem for people like Liz Cheney who are begging the Supreme Court to rush their decision so that the Jack Smith trials can begin, okay? Because even though they're probably not going to go along with Trump's broad claims of immunity, the problem here is that the lower courts, when hearing this case, failed to differentiate between what is an official act versus a private act when it comes to what Trump is being accused of, because he most definitely can be prosecuted for private actions, but it's questionable about whether or not he can be prosecuted for official actions. Now, what has to be determined is what did Trump do that is considered to be official and what did Trump do that's considered to be private. Now, theoretically, maybe Jack Smith has a case to prosecute Trump based off just private acts. But if they are trying to prosecute him based off official acts, then again, that's where the questions come in. And until that is sorted out in regards to what part of Trump's actions were official in his capacity as president of the United States and what parts were private, and does he have immunity for the official acts, the trial cannot proceed, okay? And it seems like today that the Supreme Court has basically said, hey, you know what? We're going to just kick this back to the lower court and allow them to decide which acts were official and private, which almost basically guarantees that the Jack Smith trial will be delayed until after the election.
As you read them, and I think I read them, they articulate a clear statement rule as to this court's cases for covering official acts And your point, I think, but I just want to underscore this, is that none of the statutes alleged here or cited here have a clear statement covering the president, therefore meaning that the president can't be charged for any official acts under these statutes.
That's absolutely correct. They're extended way beyond. I mean,
Now, that's separate from the question what's official versus what's personal, but for that bucket that is official, there's no clear statement, period.
That's right. And as to purely private conduct, we don't think that clear statement rule would be invoked. But as to official acts, these statutes, the ones charged in the indictment, are just way far afield from purporting to criminalize in clear terms the president's official acts.
And then just to clarify this, the president's not above the law, the president's not a king. The founders thought that. I think your point in response to that is the president is subject to prosecution for all personal acts, just like every other American for personal acts. The question is acts taken in an official capacity.
That's correct. And even those, of course, if there was an impeachment and conviction, could be prosecuted on our view.
And then lastly, I think you've acknowledged in response to others' questions that some of the acts in the indictment are private, and your view is that some are official. Is it your position then that analysis of which is which should be undertaken in the first instance by the D.C. Circuit or the district court?
Most likely the district court under the logic of Anderson.
What concerns me is, as you know, the Court of Appeals did not get into a focused consideration of what acts we're talking about or what documents we're talking about because of its adoption of what you termed, and I agree quite correctly, as a tautological statement, because the fact of prosecution was enough to take away any official immunity. The fact of prosecution, they had no need to look at what courts normally look at when you're talking about a privilege or immunity question.
Well, I think I would take issue, Mr. Chief Justice, with the idea of taking away immunity. There is no immunity that is in the Constitution unless this court creates it today. There certainly is no textual immunity. We do not submit that that's the end of the story. United States versus Nixon.
Yeah, so you see that, you heard that, okay? So just to summarize here and to keep it simple so that you guys kind of understand the main takeaway, okay? The goal of Trump's lawyers is not to necessarily get absolute immunity because that is probably not going to happen, okay? Although they may grant some form of limited immunity for official acts, okay? I mean, that is essentially what will be the outcome, I believe. The goal is to get the trial delayed, okay? And it looks like that the court is open to delaying the trial by remanding the case back to the lower courts, okay? Send it back to lower courts for the courts to decide what constitutes private versus official acts in regards to this case, okay? If the Supreme Court decides that, hey, there are some official acts immunity, right? Like there are some official acts by the President of the United States that, you know, are immune from prosecution. Then you have to determine, okay, well, which parts of what Trump did, which parts were official acts versus private acts, which would need to be decided by a lower court, which would, again, delay the trial. Now, the irony here is that the last time that this happened was when Trump claimed immunity. The former Manhattan district attorney before Alvin Bragg, who tried to get documents related to the Stormy Daniels case, when he went to court to try to get those documents, Trump said, no, I have immunity as president of the United States. You can't do that. The court disagreed with Trump. However, they remanded the decision back to a lower court, okay, to look into the decision even further, okay, to look into the case even further. And it delayed the final outcome by 8 months, okay? So again, if the Supreme Court says, hey, this needs to go back down to a lower court in order for them to look at it even further, yeah, I mean, there's no way, like there's no possible way that the Jack Smith January 6th trial will happen before the election, which again is the nightmare scenario for Liz Cheney. I think everybody knows that Trump is not going to be granted absolute immunity. Everybody knows that's not going to happen. The questions about whether or not the Supreme Court is going to continue what appears to be a purposeful effort to delay prosecutions against Trump, because they've essentially engaged in that throughout this whole ordeal where they're just like, hey, we're going to slow walk this stuff, okay? And they have fast-tracked cases where Democrats has essentially tried to overthrow democracy by, for example, removing Trump from the ballot. They saw those cases very quickly, okay? But when it comes to this case right here about Trump and January 6th and immunity, they're slow walking it, right? Again, it's just hilarious, okay? It's hilarious to watch this unfold. And I guarantee you that the mainstream media is going to melt down, okay? And Liz Cheney is going to have a panic attack when the Supreme Court eventually comes back and says, hey, we're going to further delay this by requiring that the district court look at it again, which will probably happen in another month or so, right? So it's going to be another month before we know what the Supreme Court is going to do, and then they'll probably end up delaying it even further, guarantee you that this Jack Smith trial won't happen before the election. So we'll see. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe they'll allow him to proceed forward here. They'll go ahead and rule on it. That is also a possibility, but I highly doubt it. We'll see. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.